Hello, 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 and welcome back to Full Time. I am your co-host, Tamerra Griffin, and we are in the thick of this summer of soccer. We've got the Women's Euros, Women's African Cup of Nations, Copa America Femenina kicking off very soon, the Men's Club World Cup. I don't know about you, but I'm having trouble keeping it all straight. But you know what else has been thick? The heat, which I'm sure a lot of you are feeling, being affected by, and it's only getting more intense. That's why we decided to dedicate this episode to a deep and much needed conversation about climate change and its impact across women's soccer, not just in the NWSL, but globally, because this is a global issue and it deserves much, much needed attention. Of course, I can't only do this with my esteemed co-host Meg Linehan, but we have also brought in a couple of other voices, including Dr. Madeleine Orr, who wrote the book Warming Up: How Climate is Changing Sport. We have an incredibly enriching conversation with her coming up. We are going to be talking with the athletic trainer from the Dash about how they are managing playing through extreme heat. As you know, the Dash are one of the teams most affected by climate change. But this goes so much deeper than weather delays and hydration breaks. And it's important for us to know how this is affecting all aspects of the game, not just players, but teams, leagues, fans, everyone. Meg, how are you doing? And how cool are you staying? Because I know it's been intense over there in Vermont, but it seems like maybe a little bit of respite.
Yeah, we've had some humidity. Last night we got like crazy rain. It helped break the heat a little bit, but we're getting back into summer mode. But it's been kind of wild too, because this has been a major story at the Euros as well, right? With the heat, and it does feel like some of the temperatures have been breaking, and like we do want to have a conversation about Euros, but we want to hold it until the end because I think we're both like just very excited to get into this bigger conversation about climate and the NWSL and women's soccer in general, because yeah, it does feel really, really timely. There's been a ton of coverage at The Athletic about Club World Cup and, you know, all of these tournaments being impacted by it, but it's always been a story in the NWSL. And yeah, I'm just excited that we get to take advantage of the summer break to go into a deep dive.
Indeed. I mean, climate change, climate justice, these have been ongoing conversations for almost as long as I can remember at this point, in varying degrees. It's only getting more urgent. The stakes are only getting higher. And, you know, we're never just writing about what's happening on the pitch. On that note, we would be remiss if in this broader conversation about climate change, we did not take some time out on this episode to acknowledge the devastating floods that have been wreaking havoc across Central Texas, claiming the lives already of more than 100 people. This, of course, has been an ongoing story, incredibly tragic news, but unfortunately speaks to our point that climate change affects us all. And it's not just about how it affects sport, not just how it affects women's soccer. This is a widespread issue. And if you have the means, there are a lot of donation drives, mutual aid, funding rounds that you can get involved in as this storm continues to take its course. It sucks, but these things are all connected. I strongly believe that. And Meg, you know, we're never just writing about what's happening on the pitch. It's always about how the things happening on the pitch are placed in the greater context of what's happening in the world. All the more reason we need to have an episode like this. All right. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into the climate crisis and how it affects the NWSL and soccer across the U.S. All right, Meg, before we have our conversation with Maddie Orr, let's sort of lay the groundwork of what we're going to be discussing here. I'm sure that people who have been following the NWSL are no strangers to storm delays, no stranger to hydration breaks. But of course, the climate crisis and climate change and its impact on the NWSL goes way beyond that. And across the history of the league, there have been some pretty major news stories that have sort of made this conversation more fraught across the years.
Yeah, I mean, and what's also really interesting is that there really isn't a market that has not been affected in some way, right? And I think that's a really key part of it. And of course, now with Salt Lake back in the league, with Denver coming in, with Boston coming in, with Chicago already here, like there's also extreme cold. But generally, I think what we're going to be talking about today is extreme heat. We've also seen wildfire impact with smoke and AQI issues hit the league. We've seen hurricanes play an impact. This year, Louisville actually had to postpone a game because of the tornado moving through Kentucky. So there's been a little bit of everything. But for a quick History lesson is my role as NWSL historian on this pod. The main instance that I think everybody who's been around is going to mentally think of is Rachel Daly at Houston, playing for the Dash in 2017, collapsing on the field from heat exhaustion. Now, what's interesting about this is that it was actually during a Lifetime Game of the Week. This was actually when I worked for the league. I think we'll talk more later in the show about how TV and broadcast rights are going to play a major role in the adaptability around climate change. But this made headlines, right? This was really at a point for the NWSL too, where any sort of negative story really got amplified very quickly. So that's a major thing. But we've seen it over the past few years. Also, I think it's only getting worse. You go back to 2023, Gotham versus Orlando had to be postponed because of air quality due to wildfires in Quebec coming through the Northeast. We've seen a lot of that. I've seen that in Vermont here, where you've got fires in Canada and the smoke coming down through the Northeast. 2024, not an NWSL example, but you think about San Diego, that Gold Cup game between the US and Canada, and the quality of that field and the fact that it was basically Waterworld when they were playing. But we've seen some absolutely absurd delays, be hitting 4-hour rain delay in Houston one year, May 2024 against the KC Current. And then 2024 as well, Pride had to fly early to Portland because of Hurricane Milton, a Category 3 storm coming in October. So it's also we're not just talking about even July and August with these impacts from climate on the NWSL. It is a summer league, of course. And so summer now kind of goes from May to October-ish, right? We're talking about a large period of time here. But I do think the story of this summer, and I think one of the things that we're probably going to focus on a lot, is overheating.
100%. And I think it's probably important for us to sort of define in soccer terms what overheating is. And I know you had a really informative conversation with someone from the Dash about how they manage it, because, that's always a storyline too when teams are visiting Houston for games. Yes, hydration breaks, but there's always that factor of how that's going to be affecting play on the field. So I'm really glad that we were able to have that conversation with Wafa about that, because she, I imagine, is sort of at the forefront of this kind of research, these sort of conversations around player care. But yeah, 100%. Let's hear a little bit from Wafa about overheating and how she sort of works with players to help manage that.
I'm Wafa. I'm the head athletic trainer for the Houston Dash. So I'm one of the medical providers for the team, taking care of them before they get hurt, after they get hurt, hydration, kind of a full well-being check.
Houston, I think, has seen its fair share of heat, extreme heat. So first of all, how do you prepare players for playing in extreme heat?
Yeah, I think obviously it's definitely physiological, but it's definitely trying to get them acclimatized to the weather, right? So trying to be smart about training, which our coaches are great about being very tidy in training and keeping it short and sharp, and really listening to our suggestions. The league has a policy for heat. And because we are in Houston, we have to follow that. And it's all based off of the wet bulb temperature.
I know they've shown a wet bulb, the thermometer that they use during games before. But if you don't know what a wet bulb temperature is, we also got Wafa to explain it to us, just so that way we could know what it's like to use it from a daily perspective.
The Kestrel is a wet bulb unit. It takes into account sun and wind and humidity, and it basically spits out a number at you of what is the temperature wet bulb wise. So with the league and in our NATA athletic training statement, there's a sheet of what category you're in based off what part of the country you're in, and what the different shades are, right? So there's green, yellow, orange, red, and black. And black is you shouldn't be outside, or very minimized training. And then each category has different things depending on where we're at, what's required break wise and stuff like that. So I think one of them is 4-minute breaks every hour. So it's just stuff like that. But it's really important because when we have it out there, it's giving us real-time read. So if we need to switch what we're doing based off the temperature, if the sun comes out, if the wind picks up, we at least have that in real time.
All right. Well, as someone who did not know what the wet bulb was, that was important for me to hear. And I would say that this is, for me, adding to my own education of how extreme heat affects soccer, because I know, you hear the things about how teams that play in warmer climates, they tend to pass the ball more to preserve their energy. But I do think it's worth talking a little bit about how these extreme climates do affect what we see on the field when it comes to tactics, when it comes to entertainment even. I mean, we think about NWSL teams that tend to have higher attendance numbers than those that don't. I can imagine what it must be like as a fan, especially if you have a family of young kids, having to sort of manage the risk of attending a game that might end up with a weather delay of several hours. I mean, this is such a far-reaching, like multifaceted issue, Meg. But what have you seen over the years in the league about how these things affect things that go beyond the game?
Yeah, I think what is really, I mean, like, yes, Wafa also explained to us when there are like 4-hour breaks, right? Like the number one priority for her is to get fuel into the players to like keep them fueled if they have to continue playing. But to your point, there are bigger questions around like, is it safe for us to be out here, right? Like, do we want our kids awake at midnight if this game starts playing again? So there's that impact. But I do also think, yeah, again, like we've seen this impact every single team in some way or another, whether if they're an away team or if they're a home team. Even if you can like be better, Houston thinks that the heat is an advantage for them because they're more used to it. And totally, like I get that. But at the same time, I think we have seen it impact attendance. Like you think about Houston, Orlando, Louisville, even to some extent, like the teams in the South where there is more weather, I think it's harder to manage, just like that that you can go to every single game and you know what you're going to get. So there's that part of it. And then I think, we were joking before we recorded, our producer Theo was saying, like, I don't know if the league understands that Washington, D.C. is not in the Northeast, right? Like, there's these issues everywhere, and wildfires now impacting the Northeast, but also the Northwest. So there's no team that is safe or going to be like better. Like some might be slightly better than others, but there's not going to be like a perfect climate haven team that the NWSL gets. And even if they had one, like that still leaves you 13, 15 teams in the lurch. So it's going to be a big question for the NWSL moving forward.
Totally. And I mean, moving to the other end of the spectrum, talking about the cold, I mean, as Bay Area native, of course, I'm thrilled that Bay FC is going to be hosting the NWSL Championship in San Jose. But I have to feel for the Chicagos and soon to be the Denvers and the Bostons, because what does it mean to be hosting an NWSL Championship in November in those climates? I mean, it's been done before. And I know we're going to be talking about broadcast rights and media deals because that, of course, will impact these things. Because if you recall, these games have not always been prime time, which
Correct.
Gave some space to, yes, bookmarking. But I think about things like that, especially in the context of growing the game, who's getting these opportunities to host championships, which are obviously huge business draws in a number of ways. It just makes me all the more proud of us, honestly, for having this kind of conversation, because it's something that you just know fans are discussing day in and day out at games, but hasn't really, these pieces need to be put together, because my thing about climate change, it is multidimensional. Madeleine, of course, gets into this, but it affects and will continue to affect all aspects of the league. All right. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, our amazing conversation with Madeleine Orr. All right, we are so juiced to be joined by Madeleine Orr, who wrote the book Warming Up: How Climate is Changing Sport. Maddie, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing, one, and how cool are you staying, two?
Hi, Tamerra. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and it is, we're in a heat wave where I am in Toronto, which I think is like the new normal for all of North America. I mean, we'll talk about it, but it's hot. And so, AC is a thing. And so you might hear that in the background. But I'm really excited to be here and talk about heat and climate change and how it's throwing some real curveballs at us.
Yeah. Maddie, why don't we start too with just like how you got interested in the collision of climate and sport? I know you're a skier. I'm also a skier. What does that maybe have to tell us about the nature of climate change in sport? But let's get a little bit of an origin story before we really dig in.
Yeah, so I am Canadian, born and raised in Toronto, but kind of jumped around a bit because of my parents' jobs, and had the extraordinary fortune of learning to ski as a kid. And it was great. And I remember, like, you were a skier, Meg, like you started in December and you could ski around Christmas time and right through March break, and like that all worked just fine. That's not a thing anymore. Where I live, you're really lucky if you got skiing come January, and then it wraps up end of February. Now, it's a real problem for a number of reasons that are probably pretty obvious to people listening, but I actually saw it from maybe the most grim perspective, which is it actually led to loss of life. So I was in Europe doing a ski season there, and we had a really bad winter, and it led to all kinds of weird snowfall patterns. We started seeing some real avalanche issues, and a nearby resort lost 5 kids and their instructor on the hill. Middle of the day, middle of the run. Like, they should have been totally fine, and they weren't. And that was a wake-up call that really got me jogged on this. Like, I couldn't unsee it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then I started thinking, like, that was in 2016. Every 2 months or so since then, there's been a major climate event impacting sports. So, like, it just kept happening. And then I couldn't stop. So I put on my, like, real nerd hat and went back to school and did grad school and learned how is climate change impacting people, and so bodies and communities and places that we might travel to on holiday or whatever. And then really digging down into what does this mean for the places we play and how we experience heat and storms and floods and uneven surfaces and a shorter winter. And I think I could probably do this for the whole rest of my career, which is, I guess, good news and bad news.
Whew. I mean, unfortunately, it is often those traumatizing formative experiences that inspire this kind of study, this kind of action. That is a really tragic story, but I have a lot of respect for the way that you responded to it. Maddie, pivoting from skiing to soccer, of course, both outdoor sports that feel the effects of climate change even more directly, I would say, than some indoor sports. We're in a summer of tournaments across continents, including within the US. And I'm curious whether you believe that playing soccer in US summers is feasible right now.
Ooh, most days, yes. But generally, most days isn't good enough when it comes to these big tournaments, right? And that's where it starts to get really scary. I think we're talking about two different things. If we're talking about playing soccer like you or I might, with our friends or recreationally or in a club, versus like elite professional with like 25 doctors on the sideline and a cooling tank 5 yards away, like that's a very different thing. So I think when we're talking about the elite levels, your World Cups, they probably can get away with it. Should they is a different question, but they can because of all the medical provision. And again, that's something you don't see. That's like off in the sidelines, in the, change rooms. It's not something a fan's going to see, which might lead people who are watching to think this might be okay, and I can also compete in these conditions, and that's not okay. So that's where we start to really get into like issues around access to care and justice and who has access to soccer, in what conditions and where. So in this kind of summer of tournaments, like you framed it, we're seeing a whole lot of issues in the media. But actually behind the scenes, what I'm seeing is like way more hospital visits of kids showing up in emergency rooms with heat stroke. In every continent right now, we're seeing last summer in the US, we saw 6 young Black men die on football fields, right? Like football is not soccer. It's very different, but we're seeing that show up. And it's not getting media coverage the way it should because climate change is hard to talk about and it's really uncomfortable. But every parent and person, I think, should care about this. And so I think moving forward, it's going to be more of a discussion and we're going to keep talking about it. And next summer, putting the spotlight on the men's game in North America, we're going to have some problems. So I think we're only going to hear more about the heat.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that framing of like, could you versus should you is a really important one. And I think one of the real themes of your book is just the fact that we're all going to have to adapt to this new world, right? And so even if it's not necessarily at a professional level, maybe it is a more holistic kind of across the board level. I mean, obviously there are rules around, you think about lightning storms, right? If you have a lightning strike within a certain mileage, the game stops, everybody goes inside, they clear the concourse. Like, everyone has adapted to that as a rule. I don't think the European folks who like don't get thunderstorms the way that we do fully understand it, but like as Americans, we're all pretty used to it. But what like from a big picture point of view is like the thing that you think has to be adapted kind of right now to this new normal, or like a regulation that we're really missing right now?
So FIFA a few years ago, if we're going to keep the focus on soccer, FIFA adopted heat policies. Now, they don't go as far as I would like them to go. The policy is basically that you get heat breaks once you hit that kind of 32 degrees Celsius threshold, which is warm. It's not like hot. It's warm enough. It probably should be a few degrees lower. I'm, holding the gavel and, ordering things into existence. I think the big one, and it's uncomfortable, but like the schedule's got to change. We need to be thinking about, you started it off with the question about summer, like, yeah, maybe we're not playing in July and August. And that changes what our whole calendar looks like. It changes everything, right? If we're talking about putting another FIFA World Cup in the fall, we did it in 2022. So we know it's possible. Proof of concept is there, but it does disrupt things. It disrupts the whole global football calendar. It disrupts American football in the US. NBC hates that. We know that, right? And so there's a knock-on effect here, and it's going to be a negotiation. But ultimately, if we're talking about keeping people safe, the calendar's got to change. And that would preserve almost every playing opportunity, reduce every worst case scenario risk, and keep it fun. Because I think there's two levels here, right? There's like what is safe, and that's one threshold. And then there's like the threshold of like what's fun and competitive. And those are two different things. You can probably play in hot conditions in most cases. It's just not going to be fun. And you're not going to play well. And I think players want to play well. So like there's two conversations kind of all bundled into one here.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way that you sort of leaned into that dichotomy between safety and fun, especially in American context where fun translates to entertainment, translates to money, which, is FIFA's universal language. And so it's easy to see how those things are all sort of colliding with each other. But settling in on that safety factor, I am inclined to believe that it is safer to not be playing in extreme heat, in the wake of wildfires, in, hurricane conditions, pre or post. But how do you sort of think about what it means to be holding sporting events as these things are happening and are likely to continue happening even more frequently?
Okay, now we're going into it, aren't we? It's good. It's good. We'll go there. That's a political question as much as it's a science question, right? And the truth is that when we're talking about these massive productions that, for better or worse, are public expenditure, huge public expenditure, right, of tax dollars, like there's the public to consider in all of this too. So when communities are impacted by disasters, and in the US, we're looking at fires in the West, we're talking about floods through the center and tornadoes and all sorts. And then in the East, we're talking about floods and storms, and like they're seeing everything in the East, including air pollution down from Canada. So it is an absolute mess of disaster through the summer months, right? Starting in kind of April or May, and then you see kind of that summer flux start, and then through the fall. Now, what does that mean for the ethics of this? I think every community has to kind of figure that out for themselves. I don't want to tell people like this is the ethics of hosting a big party amidst chaos. I think to some extent it's really, really good for people to have something good to look forward to that is, it's why people love sport, right? High drama, low stress, or low stakes. But at the same time, like, could our resources go to other things in certain moments? Like, yeah, we probably could have that conversation too, right? Again, I'm not here to like tell any state or country like what to do with their public purse, but I'll raise the question of like, how are we spending our money when there's really important things going on and that are impacting people's lives and livelihoods? I think with regard to the actual hosting the event, as we record this, there is no plan B. FIFA has no plan B for next year. So if one of the venues gets hit with anything, fire, floods, storms, there's no plan B. The other thing I'll point out is you are talking about 3,000 to 4,000 staff on site. We're talking about up to 60, 70,000 people, fans. and a lot of media attention. So if something were to go wrong, it would happen very publicly. I also don't think when we're talking about things going wrong because of climate hazards at an event, it's not going to be the players. It's going to be the worker, working in the parking lot. It's going to be the media person holding a huge heavy camera who gets tired because it's hot and they're in the sun on the sideline holding a camera all day long. It's going to be the volunteers who are there to make sure people are getting in okay and having a good time. Often volunteers are kids and older people, right? So like these are kind of the people that I'm worried about. I also think we're, in any group of 70,000 people, you're going to have some elderly folks who maybe have some comorbidities. Like we're talking about a very diverse group of people, which is awesome and complicated. And so it's not going to be the players, I don't think, that are going to be hit the worst with extreme heat conditions or storm conditions or whatever. It's going to be everybody else at the event and everyone in the community who is subsidizing this event happening and not necessarily reaping all the benefits because they can't afford the ticket to go.
Whew.
I feel like, Maddie, we could probably talk to you for 3 hours. I want to shift us into thinking about, the NWSL and women's sports leagues, but particularly the NWSL, because I think it has been really interesting just in terms of like we've seen effects of climate change already hit the league. We've seen hurricanes, we've seen AQI issues, we've seen heat exhaustion happen during a game. There's been all of these issues already, and I don't get the sense that there is kind of this bigger plan. There are policies in place, of course, and I think it is a league that has been, because these things have happened, they've had to compensate for it. But I want to almost start with like how do we talk about climate change within a professional league? Like, where does the responsibility lie? How do fans maybe ask for more? What's the responsibility on players? Like, again, these are all really big questions, but just as we start to think about, the next couple of years of development of the league, as the league changes and grows and all these things, there's a chance maybe to shift the way the league is being built around climate.
Yeah. And I love this question because I actually think the NWSL has leapfrogged every other league in how they're responding to this, which is really, really fun. And largely because of players who are just on it. They just get it. Like they always have, they always will. Megan Rapinoe, after the 2019 World Cup win in France, like they were very vocal about the heat wave there and how it was compromising their athletes and their opponents. They went out of their way to talk about it impacting not just them, but others. And I'm like, what a gracious winner's story to talk about how it's impacting everyone else. Like, that's so cool. And then they came back and applied it back home, right? So you have a bunch of players talking about heat, talking about what player welfare. This is an ongoing conversation. It's part of the union discussion every time that comes around, right? It's an ongoing thing. So it's come up a lot with regard to safety. And they're on it, they're aware of it. It also compromises their playing ability. So like there's a competitiveness there, which is like so cool. And then you have players like Lou Barnes, right? Captain of the ring, like amazing. I think she's been there since the team started. Yes. She's also an amazing environmental advocate, like rock star status, 10 on 10, no notes, right? She has been pushing her team to adopt kit and gear and giveaways and sponsors that are aligned with that mentality. That's cool. It's also really hard to do. So like you'll notice that it looks small and incremental. It's like one thing here and one thing the next year, but over time that adds up and it matters. And having it come from athletes actually makes it matter more because little kids look up to big kids and big kids look up to athletes. So the impact there is huge. In terms of where it can go, I mean, the options are endless. There's a big report, actually, it's going to drop in the fall, I think during New York Climate Week actually there's 7 of them for every pro league in North America of the climate impacts to each pro league. And the one on NWSL, I wrote it, so I know, is going to show that it's one of the most impacted leagues, like you said, right? Like the calendar is exposed. They're all outdoors. Their training facilities are all outdoors. This is another part that like the dudes don't always have to deal with that. And like the women are more likely to have games canceled, not postponed because they don't get the time. They don't get the support from the media contracts. But it can come. And I think there's more openness to it. There's more of a safety conversation. And so to your point, Meg, where does the conversation happen? It happens in a couple places. It happens with the media. Players are willing to have the conversation in interviews. Ask them. And there's been this idea that like the audience doesn't want to hear about it. That's not true. That's not true anymore. Like the audience is feeling the heat on that day. So if the athlete says something like, it's mighty hot out here and it's impacting us, that's relatable That's what we want from this league, is relatable athletes, people that we can look up to and feel inspired by. They do that really well already. I think they can keep doing it. So the media is one place. The second place that conversation is already happening is risk and health. Can always do better, right? Like we talk a lot in soccer about injury rates and like particularly ACLs and knees, right? Slip and fall injuries on bad pitches, that's a problem for the women more so than the men. We know that's the case, right? So if we're looking at flooded out fields or fields that don't have great drainage, this is something that's going to repeatedly come up for these women. We have to be dealing with it early and often. We also have to be thinking about the communities around us. And again, that's something that this league excels at. Could do better, always could do better, but does really well. So that's the third place that this is happening, is like, what's the conversation with your own community as a team? And how are we supporting the community, Tamerra, to your point earlier around like, oh, Kansas City is experiencing a lot of heat. What are we doing? What's the plan? Not just for us on game day, but like for everybody around us. And maybe it's things like some of our facilities get opened up as cooling centers. Maybe we're creating an indoor workout that we film with our athletes and show to like all the local girls soccer clubs, so that when that heat wave comes, here's your team showing you what to do. I think there's a lot that can happen there. So lots of good work already, lots more to do always, but I think they're well positioned to take the lead on this.
That sort of touches on another question that we had for you, Maddie, about what teams and leagues can do now and how they can be looking toward the future, which to me has always been a really critical sort of like bifocal vision that people who work in climate justice have had to have. What can we do now? How can what we're doing now set us up better for the future? And how can we be planning for the future as its own sort of space? It's a lot to cover. And as you know, this league is trying to do a lot, not always with, the most resources. But from a league perspective, how can they sort of be engaging with what I call at least like a bifocal vision, planning for now? And I'm thinking things like, policies around getting into stadiums and being able to bring in a reusable water bottle, things like that, which seem very small, but obviously high impact, while also planning for 2050, for example. How would you sort of advise the league to think about that?
So the fun thing about climate work is that you're often thinking intergenerationally when we think about now and future. And one of the pieces that I find really promising about what the leagues are currently doing and that could be done more potentially is those policies you're talking about. So we're talking about heat policies, air quality policies. Generally, right now we're talking about guidelines. Like it's not a hard and fast policy, and that's a problem. So it should be a hard and fast rule, like above a certain AQI point, it's stopped, and we're not flexing that number at all for any reason. Also because like for inclusion reasons, like you don't know what underlying conditions an athlete has. It's not their responsibility to tell us that. And so if, an athlete has had COVID 2 years ago and still has respiratory issues from that, like the air pollution is going to aggravate that in ways that like we don't necessarily know and can't understand. So that's got to be a hard and fast rule as far as I'm concerned. And then that's something that like, if the league is doing that and protecting women athletes in that way, they should be talking about it and then like showing like, here's the sample policy language so the NCAA can adopt it, club teams can adopt it, youth sport can adopt it. Like, here's what we've found works for us. We encourage you to adopt a similar policy line. Here's how to do it. And it's not hard to do actually, because we have all the science, like we know what the numbers are. It takes a little political willpower, but again, this is a league that might go there. And then to taking care of the fans, right? Like women's sports fans are awesome. They always have been awesome. They continue to be awesome in their growing numbers. This is where we can bring the fans along for that ride, right? And I think that it's like, yeah, you can refill your water bottle on site. Of course you can. You always should be. And while you're here, we're going to encourage you to bring your water bottle by like giving you a sticker because that's fun and everyone loves a sticker, right? Like
for said water bottle.
Yeah. For that water bottle. Like that will make me bring my water bottle. I will not forget. If you tell me I get a sticker, water bottle is in my bag. It's coming. So how do we do that, right? And how do we take care of people along that ride? The last thing I'm going to say is this. Women experience heat differently than men.
Mm-hmm.
The league can be partnering with the labs that are working on figuring out how it impacts women and women athletes in particular. It's very different. And then this is also different if you're on birth control or pregnancy-related hormone supplement therapy, or if you're on any kind of hormonal treatment because you're genderqueer or non-binary or transitioning or trans, like at any stage in any of these processes, and or perimenopause. We have some athletes on the higher end of the age range that could be hitting some of that, right? Any of those hormonal treatments are going to impact your thermoregulation. We do not have research on how that really works yet. This could be really cool. Now, that's a complicated one. The union's got to get on board. The athletes have to get on board. But it could be world class. It could be the coolest thing we've ever seen in sports research, as far as I'm concerned. Like, in sports research, we like to avoid those things because they're complicated. But like, yeah, life is messy. That's how it works. Like, sorry. And so I think they could get into it. And I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I love this idea. Maddie, so I live in Burlington, Vermont Green. I don't know how familiar you are with them, but their entire team is built around climate justice. And so like thinking about the water bottles, like there's a refillable water station every single game. But the other part that I've always been really struck by about Vermont Green is that they've been so purposeful about their partnerships with sponsors. Yes. I mean, obviously Ben and Jerry's, but, you know, other really sustainable brands like Seventh Generation. And I do want to talk to you about the sponsorship and partnership piece, because we've seen women's players step up. The Aramco deal with FIFA, right, when they sent a letter to say, hey, you're choosing money over women's safety and also the safety of our planet. I believe that's a Jesse Fleming quote. Houston Dash currently play in Shell Energy Stadium, right? So I think there is a little bit of disconnect from a sponsorship point of view still at this point. So how do you approach greenwashing in this space? Like, do you see it? It doesn't feel like it's as bad on the women's side of the game compared to the men's, but like, where's the improvement there maybe right at the moment?
Yeah, it's not as bad, but only because overall there's less money in women's sport. Like, I think proportionately it's probably the same. And I hate that. Look, I've been very open about the fact that I really think we could kick fossil fuels out of sport at this point for a number of health reasons. All the same arguments basically that we used to kick out tobacco 20 years ago, like copy paste, right? Not good for our kids, not good for our communities. This is like all those things, just same point. I think that doesn't typically come from leagues and teams on their own. Like, the athletes are the exception. If the athletes stick up for something, usually it happens. But that, again, takes a lot of political willpower. They spent a lot of political capital making those statements, right? And that's bold. And I congratulate them for that. And I thank them for that. But we can't put that on athletes every time. So there could be some huge opportunities for women's sport to carve out a niche here, where especially the ones that don't already have those partnerships could be seeking out partnerships with solar, with wind, with these energy providers or other sectors like green investment that, like, they're nowhere to be found in sport sponsorship portfolios at all yet, but they could be. They have enough money now. They didn't 20 years ago. They definitely have enough money to play now. So I think there's an opportunity there that hasn't fully been explored. I also think for those who have those existing partnerships, that's really, really hard. That's a hard divorce. That is a messy divorce. And not necessarily something we can do tomorrow, right? It's like, these are contracts that exist over several years. They are like, the exit clauses are ridiculous. So I think it's one of those things where, like, the best we can hope for in some cases is for teams to make commitments to not renew. But again, like, can you say that out loud? That's a really awkward, like, okay, we're Houston, we're going to say no to Shell?
Right.
Good luck, Houston. You know, like, love to see it, but ooh, that's hard. So like, I'm happy to hold all that complexity and then acknowledge that, like, it's going to be a process, but it'd be really cool to start seeing that process. The other thing we could start to see, and like, you know, sailing has started to do this with Sail GP. We've started to see some leagues incentivize environmental action, including with their partnerships. Now, that's a bit of a weird model, but like in Sail GP, the way it works is if, like, whatever team is the most environmentally or socially, I guess, they're winning on all the social and enviro stuff within a given between two races, they like win that round of like social and enviro action, and they get a benefit at the next race. And the benefit is they get to decide what order their boat goes on and off the water in, which is huge because
that's
like
major.
Yeah,
that's major because that's the difference between like an extra hour of sleep in the morning on race day and like getting off right away and getting to the shower instead of like waiting around afterwards. So like does that impact the race itself? Not necessarily, but it doesn't not, like, those, right? So I think, like, what are those benefits that we can find and carve out and incentivize teams to get on with this? Because I think there's something really cool in that model as well.
Yeah.
This is so inspiring, all of it. And I love that your book focuses not just on women's soccer, which obviously is where we spend most of our time, because I think there is something really generative about knowing how other sports are approaching the same issue that affects all sports in various ways. So even hearing about I almost said SailGPT, SailGP. I would have never thought about that. But there are so many parallels. I mean, in the NWSL, there are, community impact awards, and I'm just already thinking about how that can be leveraged in a similar way. So this is such a rich and helpful conversation, Maddie. And I know that we've discussed a number of pressing, high stakes, very urgent issues, but when you look at where women's soccer is, and we'll look, specifically in the U.S. right now, what would you say for you is the most pressing issue when it comes to women's soccer and climate change?
For me, it's the justice issue. It's the idea that not every community has the resources to keep people safe in really hot conditions. And so we need to be thinking about solutions that protect everybody, not just those who have resource. And that means we can't be saying we can compete in hot weather because some of you are going to have cooling tanks and a doctor and a physio on call. No, that doesn't always work. So how do we, I guess it's the lowest common denominator in terms of resource. I think we have to calibrate every decision to that while we build resource for everybody at the same time. Not easy to do, obviously, but I think worthwhile in the long game because there is so much talent waiting in the wings, coming up in the pipeline, ready to play. And if we lose them because it's too hot to play, or they have a heat stroke, or it's not fun anymore because it's hot every time they go play, or they have games canceled over and over through their childhood, we're going to lose girls out of sport. That's what's going to happen. It already happens too much. This is going to make it worse, but we can nix that right now. So I think there's a big opportunity to think about it from that justice lens. And I think that's where I'm going to focus my attention.
Amazing. Maddie, thank you so much. I'm feeling inspired, right? Sometimes I think it's hard to step away from the anxiety and feel inspired, but it does feel like there's so much room to still work with within women's soccer. And again, to your point, players have been on it. There is room for innovation here. So I am really excited. Hopefully this conversation will inspire some folks to think about what could come next. And again, we thank you so much for your time.
Whew, Meg, my brain is buzzing, and I also feel ready to run through a brick wall. I don't know about you, but that was such important information. I really appreciated the way Maddie connected the dots between what we're seeing happen in more climate justice centered conversations and the conversations we're having in more sports centered spaces. To me, that felt really critical. But I also appreciated the way that she provided these micro and macro ways that individuals and institutions can be taking steps toward addressing climate change. But I'm curious what stood out to you.
Yeah, it was funny when she brought up the 2019 World Cup. Obviously, I lived through that heat wave as well, and I still talk about it constantly. Yep. So I think
can't confirm.
Her bringing that up was actually kind of interesting because, the players were talking about it, and we're talking about the impact on all of the teams because I think the World Cup is always a chance to kind of reflect. 2019, there was the heat wave. 2015, Canada put the games on turf, right? So These are conditions that the players don't really have full control over, but still impact the quality of games. And so, again, when we're talking about the entertainment factor, the fact that we want these games to be as good as possible, climate is going to have a major impact moving forward, and that adaptability and being able to move things around and having that hard and fast rule, right, as Maddie was saying, I think is going to be really important moving forward. But I think that makes us have to ask the question of the thing that is going to drive this, of course, is A, money, but B, the TV rights. And can you move games? And can you work with broadcast partners to be like, actually, this isn't safe and we shouldn't play this game right now? What can we do?
Right. And Maddie did mention that American football and soccer in the U.S. is a huge hurdle for them to sort of get over when it comes to that. I mean, I remember when the NWSL basically had to be bullied out of, what was it supposed to be, a 9 a.m. Pacific kickoff in Portland?
The
what?
Championship, yeah.
Yes. Yep. I mean, we're not too far removed from those days. I'm also thinking about, what year was it that the NWSL championship was in? It was Louisville, right? The one that the Washington Spirit won?
Yes,
that
was in
that
Louisville.
game
Yeah.
had an earlier kickoff as well. I can't remember exactly the time,
and it's
but
a sponsor ally stepping in, right, and moving the game to primetime. So I think, there are levers that can get pulled. The question is everyone on the same page and understanding why the lever needs to get pulled, right? And whether that's a player safety issue, whether it's a fan safety issue, a worker safety issue, right? I think that was obviously one of the big things that people were looking at with the 2022 World Cup. The 2026 World Cup is going to, I think, shine an even bigger spot. Like, we've already seen all these stories coming out of the Club World Cup, especially with people like watching from abroad and being like, what is wrong with your weather? And it's like, well, first of all, so many things. But second of all, you're putting games in the middle of the day to allow for European viewing at night at home. And so, yes, you're going to run into problems because you're not thinking about what is the safest time to play this game. And so that's going to be some of these bigger questions moving forward. And of course, the 2026 Men's World Cup is going to have an impact on the 2026 NWSL season.
100%. I wrote a story about the NWSL's announcement, not necessarily of clear action plans yet, but they did release their sort of skeleton for the 2026 season, indicating that they are prioritizing the way that they're going to be balancing the 2026 Men's World Cup in the summer with the NWSL season. Of course, we will keep you updated with every announcement that comes from that as they come. It's good to know, of course, that the league is thinking about those things. It's also like, well, of course, you should be. Remains to be seen.
That is your job.
Yes, good to know that we are on the same page there in terms of the priority and the stakes of that, right? Because it is understandably a tough balance to strike. And that's honestly before you even bring in the weather factors, the climate factors, the extreme heat considerations. So, like I said, stay tuned to the Athletics coverage of how that is going to work out. We are in a lot of ways, unprecedented times, but not times that we couldn't have seen coming if we're paying attention. Lots to handle, though. Lots to handle. And of course, amidst this ongoing conversation, as Maddie pointed out, about the schedule that we abide by here in the States.
Yeah. And then before we wrap up on this section too, just one more plug for Maddie's book, Warming Up, because first of all, go buy it at your local independent bookstore. But I know we have been talking about a book club. It might be a good first one to start with. I've been reading it. It's pretty good. I think it's also pretty, climate books are not always light, right? But I think there is, based off of our conversation, right? There's a lot of energy around this as well. It's not all anxiety inducing. And I think, again, having seen firsthand that you can have sports and climate live hand in hand with Vermont Green and still have it be fun and something that's invigorating rather than something that feels really sad is really good. So, I mean, if folks are open to a book club, I'm ready to go.
100%. I love a book club. I can see this one having a nice sort of pairing with maybe a scoop of Ben and Jerry's or something like that.
There we go.
I'm all for it. Let us know in our DMs, email us if you're into the idea of a book club, because we're feeling like we're hitting a critical mass there. All right. Before we get out of here, surely by now you're tapped into this hot soccer summer. Women's Euros have kicked off and have grabbed all of us by the scruff of our necks with these incredible games. Women's African Cup of Nations is all underway. We haven't even gotten yet to Copa America Femenina. But if you didn't know, Full-Time Euros just dropped on Wednesday, breaking down England's emphatic 4-0 victory over the Netherlands, which features a chat with Michael Cox, who breaks down all the tactics of how they were able to pull that off. Meg, that's not even all that we've witnessed today.
Yeah, I mean, we got to talk about Wednesday's day of Jess Fishlock. Result aside, Jess Fishlock getting a goal for Wales in this tournament, I think everybody, my entire Blue Sky feed was just Jess Fishlock's name in a row. And so I think that's been one of the real moments of the tournament. I think, we're obviously coming at this from a vibes standpoint rather than, if you want the rundown, go back, listen to Full-Time Euros. But it has been a very interesting. I feel like I have started rooting for Switzerland in a way that I did not anticipate. So
100%. The like, wow, Switzerland's hosting the Euros to wow, look at Switzerland pipeline has, I think, taken all of us outside of that country by surprise. 100%. I'm sure, of course, England's win has brought a ton of relief to that whole country after losing to France, bringing that group of death title. I mean, that's why we called it that in the first place, right?
100%.
There's also been a lot happening in WAFCON. I mean, I cannot believe that Barbara Banda and Rachel Kununanji, or maybe I can, have basically
you can believe that.
Right. They put that team on their back. They have scored the entirety of the Copper Queens goals so far in a 2-2 draw with Morocco to open up that tournament and narrowly beating Senegal, of all teams, 3-2. They've scored all of the Copper Queens goals. And again, not totally surprising, but still nice to see.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, Barbara Banda took, under a minute to score the first goal for Zambia. So I think everybody was anticipating her being very important for this tournament. But also, I think everybody in the NWSL is probably pulling for Zambia to, make it through and get results, go into the knockout stages, maybe win it all. Because I think this is a real chance for Barbara Banda, from an international standpoint. I think these tournaments, Euros especially, what is going to be really interesting, I will say, for me, is at the tail end of the year when we're starting to talk about year-end awards and player of the year, right? If Barbara Banda takes Zambia all the way through WAFCON, does that put her in the same conversation as, one of the Esther, right? Who has been on a scoring streak for Spain. Mm-hmm. So this is we got to start planting some flags right now for that award conversation of we should all be on Barbara Banda watch, and I am ready for that propaganda.
Totally. Especially when, we've seen this happen on the men's side. What happens when AFCON is implied to be not as weighty of a tournament compared to the Euros when it comes to these awards. So that is such a great shout, Meg. I love that you said that. And I just love this tournament. I mean, speaking of vibes, we can have a whole Vibes FC podcast about WAFCON. It's so fun. The dancing, the looks, the singing. If you're not tuned in, we have a couple of pieces and we'll have many more to come on that tournament. Who's standing out, who's upsetting, who's breaking out. Please make sure that you're following along because you don't want to miss it.
Yeah. Also, just real quick before we actually get out of here, I want to shout out that one Belgium fan who's in the cheese hat with the horns. They're just also the women's game has been really good about tracking this one woman with every crowd. Anytime they feature her in the crowd, the women's game is we seen her, we're posting her, we're on it. I love a summer tournament and the way that people are just what is the most chaotic look I could come with, and I want more of that energy. I think we got to really step it up on the US in terms of not even set the patriotism. I just want to see more chaotic outfits for the U.S.
We can do better than the Truly Baby.
Yeah, 100%. Though the Truly Baby was
that's
funny.
Our offering to the culture right now, and so plenty to build on, listeners. But yeah, totally agree. It's been so much fun, and I'm glad that we're able to sort of enjoy these group stages, even though they've been chaotic. Because once we get to knockouts, the sweat is just gonna. It's just going to start coming through the pores from the tension. But until then, we're vibing. We're vibing. And we will be back with you next week, but that's our show for now. We have got to go. But in case you didn't know, The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to deliver the very best coverage of women's sports, which you can check out at the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. The link, as always, will be in our show notes for you. This has been Full Time. Appreciate you joining us. My name's Tamerra Griffin. Make sure that you follow the show on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at TA Fulltime. All the best places to scroll, I think, for the most part. You can find me otherwise trying to stay cool and double and triple screening to my heart's content on Instagram and Blue Sky.
I'm Meg Linehan. You can also find me on Instagram and Blue Sky. Tamerra, in addition to this, I'm also following Vermont Green on the playoff hunt. I want to shout out my handsome son, as I've been jokingly referring to him, Zach Zange, who's been on a scoring streak. We're going to go to an away trip and then playoffs for USL2. I'm going through it soccer-wise.
Oh.
So just send good vibes for me, too.
Yeah, I mean, you're fueling with some of the most beautiful looking broccoli I've ever seen. So if nothing else, you are going to be well fibered up. sorry. Not sorry. This show is not possible without podcast producer Theo Lloyd Hughes, video producer Leah Griffin, and executive producer Emily Olson. Thank you as always for listening, and we'll see you next week.